you again for joining us on Better Health Podcast. This, I believe, is your favorite health program. Okay, I want to share the slides now. Okay, right. I think everybody can see the slides now. So I already put in the title. It's Red Meat on Trial, and the verdict nobody questioned. If you remember, the past few weeks, like 2 weeks, we did those installments where we talked about the dark forces that are influencing our healthcare. And the particular example I gave was the cholesterol hypothesis, how this cholesterol hypothesis came and all the lies and all the atrocities, if you will, that has been committed in science. And I gave you all the proofs, like I always do. I try to give all the proofs for every conversation, everything, so that you understand what we are doing. And the reason I give those proofs is this: there's a lot of misinformation in healthcare, a lot of error in information. As in, nutritional information is so confusing. Today, eat this, then tomorrow, don't eat. You'll be wondering why. Or one healthcare professional will tell you, eat this, another one says, don't eat. So you'll be confused. What is it? What is going on? And there's a lot of it, because a lot of them, there are a couple of reasons, and one of them is what we are sharing, that science has kind of been lopsided. A lot of bribe, a lot of corruption there. So most people sponsor studies for as marketing, whatever, to just market their own products. And another thing is that most healthcare professionals don't know how to really do proper research. They don't know how to analyze study. They don't know how to interpret data. If you cannot interpret data, it's a problem. You only go to the summary. And maybe in the future, I'm going to show you some studies where these are by professors. You will even see their names. Some of them are still alive. And they quoted 11 studies. In those 11 studies they quoted, this is systematic review. You put many studies together and you analyze them together. It can be meta-analysis, can be systematic review. So imagine putting 11 studies and you misquote 9 of them just to benefit you, because they have collected money from some people. So we share that in the future. So that's basically why I go deep down to prove some of the things I'm saying. Okay. The campaign against red meat, when did it start? It actually started many years ago, 1863. This is what I'm showing you now. And the lady you see there is Ellen G. White. She actually the co-founder of Seventh-day Adventist Church. So if you're from Seventh-day Adventist Church, please pardon me. It's not an attack on anybody or anything. This is just giving a kind of background to what we are looking at, in order for you to have proper understanding of what we're discussing, so that you make your own decisions, accurately, or informed decision. So look at this campaign against red meat. It actually didn't begin in the lab. It actually started in the church. So it wasn't because there was any lab, any test or anything. It was in the church. And then this lady said, you and I were not there. Like they always say, you're not there, we can't prove it or disprove it. Said she had over 2,000 dreams and revelations from God. And one of them is that red meat is evil. It created sensual and lustful feeling in the people that consumed red meat. So that was the genesis of this whole thing. And then there came along Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. He's a physician. He's a medical doctor, and like a protege of Ellen G. White, I mentioned. They are all Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then he started preaching what they call biologic living. That biologic living included Mediterranean diets, having fresh air, doing exercise, abstinence, from certain things. And from every front, he was arguing against red meat. So if you are a philosopher, he will go into philosophy. If you are a Christian, he will begin to quote Bible. if you believe in evolution, he will go to all this evolution, the theory of evolution and all that. So he was using all these different fronts to argue against the eat of red meat. That's how I continue. And then this is him and his brother. His brother also, the Kellogg brothers. And that's how science actually came. They turned, do I say turned science? Now, it wasn't really science, but they turned whatever it is to business. And that's how they began to create all these series. So all these series that we know today as Kellogg's, this is when it began in the maybe it actually began in the 1920s, started creating this after, all these years of doing their own things. Because they wanted people to, by all means, not to eat meat. So they created this. And it didn't just end there. You have this Seventh-day Adventist because of their co-founder. So the message started going global. It's a very big organization. They have thousands of schools and hospitals everywhere in the world. And what they were preaching is just plant-based. So they established different study centers. They started promoting different studies. But most of those studies found correlations between plant-based diet and longer lifespan. And it can be dicey. I will go into that later. Sometimes, let's say somebody was eating junk, the junk, the way it is, a food that is bad. And then from that bad, you now go, instead of good, you go in between. You discover that your health will be better, okay? Because you were bad, now you are in between, but not good, not optimal. So you can claim that, it's now better, that this is not the best. Why? Because you are comparing it with the really bad. That doesn't mean that is optimal, just like this plant-based diet. And you see a lot of people, having that claim that vegetarian diet is optimal or whatever. Well, your bubble will be burst. So basically, these studies were observational. And I will explain what observational studies are. And then in 1961, science jumped on the board. And if you remember what we have discussed before, Ansel Keys' cholesterol theory. This is how science jumped on board with that cholesterol theory. And then, because the cholesterol theory involves saturated fat and cholesterol, and these two are part of red meat. So you see, also part of eggs. So when you say cholesterol, saturated fat is bad, it means you're saying red meat is bad, eggs are bad. And this is that publication that was done in 1961. You remember we mentioned it before. If you look at some of the slides that we have presented before, we have mentioned it. So in this, you see that from nowhere, like we just said before, that American Heart Association just made a recommendation. Imagine just making a recommendation that instead of eating cholesterol and saturated fat, for example, red meat, eggs, coconut oil, palm oil, start using vegetable oil. That's basically the summary of this, because they're asking you to use polyunsaturated fat instead of saturated fat. Now, we know that after a couple of years, the theory collapsed. Let me hide this. The theory of cholesterol collapsed, and I showed you how some of the studies they did not line up at all. Did a couple of studies, and then they were trying to manipulate the data. Some of the data they couldn't manipulate. They hid it, or they hid them. And then after many years, they were now discovered. So you see that patients with low cholesterol were still getting sick. And that was what we saw from some of those studies. I showed you one particular study that they looked at over 106,000 people that had low cholesterol or even normal cholesterol. At the end of the day, these people, 75% of them had attack. So imagine that. So that's quite contradictory. Let me put it that way. It's quite contradictory. So that original hypothesis just fell apart. And the very one used to demonize red meat. So when it fell apart, what happened? Discovered that they started looking for another way. So when you remove the cholesterol theory, there's no scientific basis again to destroy red meat. So these people that are actually trying to destroy red meat, what's their message? That red meat causes everything from cancer to heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and all that things, you know, you can mention. And the question is, could they be right? Or could this be right? From the introductory part I'm giving you, you already see that they might be wrong. So first of all, I want to show you this. I'm going to show it to you again later. This is the strength of evidence. As in, if you want to look at different evidence to see which evidence is strong. If I say I do a research now and I publish it, and you want to look at that research and say, okay, this research should be thrown into the dustbin, or this research is really something that we should work with. How do you? It goes from up to down. The strongest evidence, they call it meta-analysis and systematic review, like I mentioned. If you look at number 3, number 2 is actually a standard in healthcare. If you want to test anything now, you want to test paracetamol, you want to test amoxicillin, clavulanic acid, you want to test any drug, anything, you use randomized control trial. You have 2 groups. You make sure each of the groups have the same, you know, characteristics. This group have the same characteristics as the other group. And when you do that, you administer to one group the drug or whatever you are testing, and then to the other group, you give them what they call placebo. Placebo means chalk. Nothing, nothing is inside. Maybe you can call it gari, you can call it fufu, you know, it's in that substance. And then you now compare. So that is the gold standard. But when you now have one of it, like you now test red meat, for example, using this randomized control, and you now have a lot of randomized controls together, you now analyze them together. That one is now stronger. That's what gives you that meta-analysis. Okay, so meta-analysis, number 1 is the strongest. You have number 2, then number 3, non-randomized. As in, you didn't randomize the characters of, maybe you have adults here, you don't have adults in the other group, you know. These people eat semo, these other people don't eat semo, you know, something like that. Then number 4 is observational study. Then you have 5 case studies. Case study is like, it can be you now listening to me. You took paracetamol and then cancer disappeared. You say, wow. You not say, wow, it's a case. That does not mean it's happening to everybody. So that is, it can be presented as data, but you cannot just generalize. It's not a strong data. Then you have expert opinion. Like me now, I can give you an opinion. Maybe I don't prove it. I say, okay, this is what I think. It's just an opinion. It's not proven. So you see that expert opinion is actually the least. So you see from down, you see observational study is number 4. And why did I bring this and take time to explain it? That is where most of the evidence are, if not all the evidence that have been used against, as a matter of fact, all the evidence against red meat, all the anti-meat evidence, they are all observational study. And observational studies should be taken with a pinch of salt. However, I wanted to bring something here. I want to look at grass-fed red meat versus corn-fed red meat. You know, I know you'll be asking, most of us that live in Nigeria will know. On the left, you see corn-fed. That's what you have on the left. On the right, that's the one we started with, grass-fed. If you look at the difference, you see that this one is much more marbled, the one on the left-hand side. Why is corn-fed? In America, let me use America as an example. From a calf, if you have a young cow now, it's a calf. From that calf to full-blown cow, it takes 18 months, 1.5 years. Is it not? The 18 months. Well, in America, they can feed the calf corn, they feed it antibiotics, and a couple of other things. And you know what? It develops from that calf to full-blown cow in 6 months. That is why you can see the difference. And why I brought this is, if you're eating the one on the left-hand side, the cow you're eating is actually sick. It has metabolic syndrome because they have been fed a lot of corn and a lot of antibiotics. And that one, you're going to have issues when you eat that. So you cannot compare that with this one on the right-hand side. So if somebody comes out and wants to do studies, and then, base your studies on people eating this on the left-hand side, you're not going to get the real thing. That is point blank. That is the truth. And why I mentioned this is, in Nigeria here, I know that they don't feed cow corn and all that. It's grass they actually feed them. But chicken is where I have problem. This is why I have problem with chicken. Most people that do poultry, I know one or two are listening to me now. They feed them corn, they feed them antibiotics, they feed them growth hormone. Corn is not bad if it's not GMO, and sometimes you might not know whether it's GMO or not, except from the source you're buying it. So it's not bad, inherently bad. At least it's a whole grain. But when you add antibiotics, antibiotics is not just to prevent infection. Antibiotics has been shown to make animals grow fast. If you want to make animals grow fast, you give them antibiotics. And then some now use growth hormone as well. So if you are doing that, you are putting the life of all of us at risk. So I'm just trying to encourage you not to do that, please. It's not good for us. That's why a lot of times I now prefer even goat meat, prefer cow meat to chicken. You see some of the chicken that you buy. I remember one Christmas I bought 2 chicken. 2. We're in Lagos, we didn't travel. Do you know those big paint buckets? I'm not exaggerating. The 2 chicken filled. The 2 chicken were bigger than goat. It was like, wow, 2 chicken. But at the end of the day, when I started this study and research, I now discovered that they're not really good. Having said that, now in 2015, let's say by 2015, if not up till now, there was no systematic review done on health and red meat. You remember when we mentioned that systematic review is the highest level of evidence before randomized control trial and all that. So there was no systematic review. So even if you do observational study or case study, even the low quality evidence, like we mentioned, do a systematic review of them. It wasn't done. But look at what happened. In 2015, the American, in America, they usually have a committee, a guideline advisory committee. They, nominate people, appoint them. They now look at the dietary guideline. Discovered that the 2015 dietary guideline was more into plant-based or near vegetarian. But if you look at those committees, 11 out of them had published what in favor of plant-based. So many of them were vegetarian. So imagine having 15 members of a committee, 11 out of them were, disposed to the vegetarian diet. What do you think they're going to come up with? So you see that the committee wasn't really balanced. You remember this graph? I'm bringing it again because I believe you will learn something from it. So, but let me just show you, when you say observational study, it's usually correlation that they do, okay? Correlation. This thing is correlated to this. Let me give you an example. Let's say somebody travel into space. You don't know what happens on Earth much, but you're a human being like you and I. And you go there, and then they now ask you to look at Lagos and look at accidents, okay? They now, okay, look at the possible cause of accidents. Usually accidents will happen, and then after 1 hour, that is when you are able to see it. Listen to me. Accidents will happen. After 1-2 hours, you're able to see it, that it happened. Now you are studying it from space. When you look at accident, you discover that maybe you look at 50 different accidents, and you see ambulance around the accidents. So any accident scene you see, because you are going to see it at least after 1 hour, and then the ambulance has arrived, ambulance is there. So in your mind now, you start thinking, oh, is it that is this ambulance that is causing the accident? Because that is correlation, but it cannot be causation. Anywhere accident happens, ambulance will always go there. And it's correlated. So that is what happened now. Look at margarine consumption versus the divorce rate. They were correlated. One is decreasing, the other one is decreasing from a study between 2000 and 2009. Can you imagine? What has margarine consumption to do with the rate of divorce? That's correlation. I wanted to show another study. That study was looking at internet users and breast cancer. In the study, there was a correlation between internet use and breast cancer rate. As in the people that used the internet the more had more breast cancer. There's no internet, it does not cause it. It's only a correlation. But the question is, do we now throw away observational study? Because this observational study, basically what they do, let me just explain it before I go ahead. What they basically do is they bring a questionnaire. That's one of the ways though. Like this red meat now, that is the basic way they always do that. They bring a questionnaire to you and you start filling the questions. They will look at 2020, January 2020 to maybe April. How much meat, red meat did you consume? Can you remember? That is the question. Can you really remember? So one of the problems is recall. You won't even remember exactly how much red meat you ate. And the other thing is, how do you quantify? Especially in this red meat now. It's not like cigarette. I'll use cigarette now as an example. It's not like cigarette. I say, okay, I smoke around average of 5 sticks a day. But this one, how much red meat do you eat? Me now, I ask, you ask me, I say, okay, 2 pieces on the average. And then another person say, well, I eat 3 pieces. That 3 pieces might be small pieces and my own 2 pieces might be big. So what standard or yardstick are you going to use? Those are the problems with this recall. But then you cannot throw away observational study because that's how they found a correlation between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. But let me show you something. The heavy smokers, between 15 times are like 1,500% to almost 3,000%. So the risk. So when you have a risk of 1,500, 3,000% risk, you don't need to know, or you don't even need anything to tell you that this is causing this. But look at some of these studies. Look at the third line. You say, however, compared with the Bova, the Loomis, and the Guyton report of the relative risk of 17% of fresh meat and cancer, and then 18% for processed meat. You are talking about 1,500%. Another person is looking at 17%. And in the field of epidemiology, it's believed that when numbers are below 100% or 200%, those studies are unreliable. It can be confounders. It can be any other thing. Let me give you an example of a confounder. Let's say you do study in Lagos. You want to look at cholesterol reduction with a particular product. And then you're using people that eat afang soup and other people that don't eat afang soup. Meanwhile, afang soup will lower cholesterol. So it means for the people that eat afang soup, their own will be much more lower than the people that are not eating. That will confound the study. That's a confounder. So when you don't put that into consideration, you have a problem. So we look at the grade system. This grading of recommendation, assessment, development, and evaluation is a system. What we're trying to do is like prove or disprove this. We're looking at studies. This system, they came out to actually look at studies, different studies, as much as they could find. Relationship between red meat, heart disease, and cancer, and other things. Look at one of the studies. I marked this conclusion. I'm sorry, I think it disappeared. Like I said, I was in a hurry. You see, effects of lower versus high red meat intake on cardiovascular and cancer outcome. If you look at on the right hand side, still down, you see conclusion there. It's a low to very low certainty evidence suggests that diets restricted in red meat may have little or no effect on major cardiometabolic. So you can see that they are trying to, they don't even know how to analyze this. And if you look at, sorry, some of the things I highlighted have disappeared. If you look at HR inside this, the top right-hand side, the top column, you are seeing HR 0.98, 0.99. That is less than 1%. And you remember, we're talking about how many percent? 100%, to even consider it useful. And this is a study looking at 48,000 people. And this great study, great reference I mentioned before, they studied over 6 million. The study they analyzed together, over 6 million. Look at this one now. Of 61 articles on this called data synthesis, there's 1 articles on 55 cohorts with over 4 million participants. Look at the last line, conclusion. The magnitude of association between red meat and processed meat consumption and all-cause mortality and adverse metabolic outcome is very small, and the evidence is of low certainty. I think this is small, evidence is low certainty, as in anything can cause it. Low certainty means it's not sure. There could be other confounders that are causing it. Somebody is eating red meat and is smoking. Or maybe it's processed meat, not even the natural, meat from cow now. They are processed meat, the person is eating. So you can see, that's why I brought all this. Look at the saturated fats and health. Red meat has saturated fat. That's the bone of contention. A reassessment and proposal for food-based recommendation. This is what they said. They said there is no robust evidence that current population-wide arbitrary upper limit on saturated fat consumption in the United States will prevent cardiovascular disease or reduce mortality. They said no robust evidence. So that if you reduce it, it will reduce or prevent cardiovascular disease, that's heart disease and all that, and then reduce deaths. No evidence. So you can see, these are strong evidence I'm presenting to you now. These are the highest level of evidence when you talk about meta-analysis and systematic review. That's what I just showed you. Putting all of this together, looking at 40,000 people, looking at another one, 4 million people. And these are different studies. One is 12 studies, the other one is 61 studies. There are many I would have shown you, but because of time. Then look at this. It's from a book called The Big Fat Surprise. Nina Teiko. This Nina was actually one of the first people to ring the bell on this saturated fat and all the. She was one of the first people to unfold some of the conspiracy and all the lies and all that, because she's a science journalist, and she was actually meant to study trans fat. We will talk about trans fat in the future. She was to study trans fat, but when she started looking at saturated fat, a lot of things started jumping up, and she started contacting the people that were involved in those studies. Do you know many of the people involved in studies declined to comment? Some of them will hang phone on her. She now said, no, something is wrong somewhere. And she was the one that covered a lot of bribes and all that. Just look at this. The first line, you see that line, total meat. You can see it. What color is that one now? Please, no color much. The second one, I think it should be green, red meat. And then you now have poultry. So you can see that this graph is from 1800 to 2007, 1800. So for hundreds or thousands of years, you see that graph didn't start from zero, the red meat. We have been consuming red meat hundreds of thousands of years. It's just poultry that we just started consuming not too long ago. Around the time, you can see it's almost zero there. Let's see another one. You can see saturated fat. You can see it didn't start from zero. This graph started from 1900. Saturated fat didn't start from zero. So it means that we have been consuming anything that has saturated fat, maybe palm oil, red meat, and all that for hundreds and thousands of years. But what did they start consuming recently? Look at the vegetable oil. And at that same time, that was when heart disease started. Now, 500 years ago, no heart disease, no report. The only reports you see that people might have sudden death is due to what they call congenital heart disease. Congenital is You were born with it. Maybe you were born with a deformed heart, inherited, something like that. So you can, die and all that. But this heart disease we're talking about today now, that your blood vessels will clog and all that, it wasn't there. These are the proofs. So the question is, why do we blame an ancient food for a modern disease? That is what this graph is showing. And then I went ahead to look at communities. This Tokelau Island in New Zealand, in dwellers or inhabitants, people that live there, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1950s, 1930s, and all that. Look at their look at what they consume. 53% of their diet is fat, 48% is saturated fat. The saturated fat, they said, don't eat. A lot of coconut oil, a lot of meat and all that. 2% is polyunsaturated fatty acid. So they were eating all these polyunsaturated, that's vegetable oil and all that. Look at it. In 1982, 0.0% of men 40 to 69 years of age with previous myocardial infarction, that's heart attack and all that. No obesity, no diabetes. So imagine they were eating what people have told you now that causes heart disease. This population, they were eating it, and there was no heart disease in that population. But this trend has changed. Now they have started eating Western food. Diabetes has started. Heart disease has started. Let me show you another one. These are not far from us. The Maasai tribe, Kenya. Look at what they eat. 66% is animal fat. So imagine, and that animal is red meat. They eat cow, a lot of cow. So imagine 66% of their diet is from animal. That's 30 to 45% is saturated fat, 70% carbohydrate. No heart disease. Can you imagine? American Heart Association says your saturated fat should not be more than 5 to 6% of your calorie. But they are only saturated to 25%. Can you imagine that? Yet, no heart disease. And we are blaming. And I can show you many other communities. Inuit community, there's another Inuit community. This is another one, the Hadza community also of Tanzania. There's an Inuit community in Canada. The same thing. So I choose different from different continents so that it won't be like, So these are the two things you consider. One is what God has given us. The other one is what man has made for us. I think the choice is yours. Choose ye today the way you want to eat. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you gained some